जी, तो हमारे सेकंड सेगमेंट में हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं मुनीब कादिर। हाउ आर यू?
I'm good.
अच्छा मुनीब, सबसे पहले तो मैं सवाल ये पूछना चाहूँगी, कंसिडरिंग द हिस्ट्री जो कि इजरायली पैलेस्टीनियन इशू की चल रही है, हम न्यूज़ पे पढ़ते हैं और काफ़ी सालों से हम बस इसको देख रहे हैं कि मतलब मामला बदतर होता जा रहा है।
जी
जो 700,000 सेटलर्स हैं इस वक्त मौजूद हैं वहाँ पे, इजरायली सेटलर्स इन पैलेस्टाइन, आपको क्या लगता है कि एट दिस पॉइंट, कंसिडरिंग द डेमोग्राफिक्स ऑफ पैलेस्टाइन, कैन अ टू नेशन solution is it viable? Is it possible anymore?
uh, I believe इसकी जो history है, this conflict which has been going on between Israel and Palestine, and it's spanned 7 decades, more than that now. It's very complex, and इसके अंदर the narratives are also very conflicting. But the short of it is कि 1948 में when the British had left Palestine, and उसी वक्त the Second World War had just ended in 1945, there was this formation of an identity. There was this identity politics which emerged among the Jewish community that they needed a land of their own. कि इनको एक अपना मुल्क है, they had the promised land of their own, and they felt कि Muslim majority countries भी हैं, you've got Hindus have India, we as Jewish people don't have a country of our own. So इधर से वो कहते हैं Zionism, जो कि एक nationalistic idea है कि Jewish people deserve a land of their own and they have been promised that land. So they had their eyes on the territory or the land where the Palestinians were already there, which did belong to the Palestinians. So वहाँ उन्होंने settlements बनाना शुरू की, settlements build करना शुरू की. And of course, as would happen whenever there are settlements built on someone else's land, so resistance आती है. So resistance came from the other side, and then there was a full-blown conflict. And that is when the United Nations stepped in, and फिर finally a green line was agreed upon कि जो West Bank वाला area है, also consisting of East Jerusalem, that was designated to Palestine. Gaza Strip again was meant to be Palestinian land, and जो area demarcate किया गया था कि that belongs to Israel, that had been agreed upon. But unfortunately, Jerusalem के अंदर, now Jerusalem houses some of the holiest sites for both the Jewish and the Muslim communities. So this was not going to be resolved very easily. So 1967 onwards, there has been an intensification of tensions. उसके बाद green line violate हुई. Israeli regime has been building more and more settlements, and so on and so forth. इसके ऊपर interestingly एक International Court of Justice की भी decision आई हुई है 2004 की, जिसके अंदर उन्होंने ये कहा था कि these settlements which have been built, हुआ ये है कि they have separated Palestinians from their own kith and kin. अपने ही यानी रिश्तेदारों से उनको अलहदा कर दिया, ऐसी walls बना दी हैं, उनकी freedom of movement restrict की हुई है. तो अब हम लोगों को नजर आ रहा है how this tension has escalated even more in the last 2 weeks or so. ये जो शेख जरा के अंदर भी हो रहा है कि they are demolishing houses belonging to Palestinians, they building more and more settlements. एक demographic change effect किया जा रहा है, which we will come to that later. But
change उन्होंने कोशिश की थी 2005 में, I think.
There was 2014 as well when there were a lot of
they
tensions.
tried to remove those settlers, लेकिन वो इजरायली गवर्नमेंट को ही बैकलैश हुआ था उसके बाद.
But unfortunately, the thing is कि the Israeli government has a lot of clout and international support, and we also saw that happening during the Trump administration, where Donald Trump had said कि अब हम लोग US embassy जौन सी है अपनी इजराइल वाली, we are going to shift it to Jerusalem, making then Jerusalem the de facto capital of Israel, in complete violation of UN resolutions and the Green Line. जिसके अंदर के that area was designated to the Palestinians. So इसके ऊपर ये जो tensions हैं वो खत्म हो ही नहीं रही, because the thing is कि एक तरफ you've got international law, but on the other hand you've got the very guardians of international law, who are not allowing any stance to be taken. Whenever something comes up at the Security Council, the US vetoes it. So this problem is never going to resolve.
But this international law takes me to a very important question. I was the other day, मैं उस पे टीवी पर जो इनका डिफेंस मिनिस्टर इजराइल को सुन रहा था, वो कह रहा था कि what ICC, what ICJ, I don't care, we don't care. So इस एटीट्यूड से अगर पाकिस्तान जाए, कोई और मुल्क, गरीब मुल्क जाए, तो एक और रवैया होता है इंटरनेशनल कम्युनिटी का.
जी.
What do you say about that? कि उसका रवैया ठीक है कि गलत है, या दूसरा क्या वो वाकई ही is not covered under that ICC?
Well, sorry, go ahead. No, because they haven't ratified it, so automatically.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask.
All right, that's an interesting point. I would like to address that. But coming to what Benny Gantz, which is the defense minister of Israel, जो उसका stance है, there is this culture of impunity that we are seeing, and it's not just for Israel, it's also for the USA. मतलब this might be a bit off track, but जो अबू ghraib prison या Guantanamo Bay के अंदर जो torture document की गई है that the US officials had been using, उसके ऊपर there has been no consequence, and the US has just said that this doesn't apply to us unilaterally. And that is exactly what Israel is also doing. And I remember from personal experience, I was once debating on an Indian television channel, and they glorify the so-called Israeli model a lot on it. And uske upar ek GD Bakshi tha. So when I mentioned international law, he laughed. He laughed and said, "International law? What international law?" Usi tarah se I remember I was with an Indian panelist who belonged to the BJP. He laughed off at the suggestion of international human rights law. He said it holds no teeth. Those were his words. So baat ye hai ki whoever believes in the Israeli model, as they call it, and as they glorify it, knows for sure that international law does not count. I mean, for them, it's not an opinion, it's a statement of fact.
So is Israel pro a single state solution?
See, two-state solution, सबसे पहले तो ये question आता है कि even is Palestine in favor of it? Because if you look at Hamas, for instance, even they don't believe in it. They believe कि ये पूरी territory ही हमारी है. Same goes for Israel, because मैंने आप लोगों को जो history में बताई है वो यही थी, this realization that we as Jewish people don't have a land of our own. Now, in isolation, I think कि ये वाला narrative अगर हम लोग सुने, and especially what they had been through in the Holocaust, that was horrific. Matlab, words fail me if I have to put it in a sentence, the scale of what they had gone through. So this realization that you as a religious group want to have your own motherland, it makes a lot of sense. But there is a problem when you go and you forcibly try to build settlements and you try to, uproot people from their own lands. You start treating them as second, I would rather say third-class citizens. You divide them from their kith and kin, and you start killing them without drawing any distinction between civilian and military targets. Then we have a problem. Then we have a huge problem. When you demolish houses, I can just tell you in 2006, there was a report by BT Salem, which is an Israel-based human rights organization. They had reported that 4,000 houses had been demolished at that time, belonging to Palestinians. Now, tell me, that's what I would want to ask you, people who are viewing this. If someone enters into your house and they say, we're demolishing it, off you go. What are you going to do?
No, but see, that brings me to another important question. When somebody addresses कि Muslims जो हैं, they are terrorists. So we take offense to that. Of course, not all Muslims are terrorists, and the ones who are, वो भी पता नहीं Muslims हैं कि नहीं हैं, but of course एक segment है. इसी तरह हमारे foreign minister साहब ने जब कल स्टेटमेंट दी है टीवी पर, उन्होंने कहा उसको he was in an interview and he said exactly जिसको anti-Semitism ट्रीट कर रही हैं वो होस्ट जो हैं, he said कि Israelis जो हैं they have an influence on the media. So सारे Israelis तो ऐसे नहीं हो सकते ना, जिस तरह हम कहेंगे जी पाकिस्तानीज का इन्फ्लुएंस है, पाकिस्तानीज बड़े गंदे एग्जांपल दे रहे हैं, ये मिलावट करते हैं. So you can't paint everybody with the same brush.
Very interesting.
He didn't say Jews, he said Israel.
That is exactly what I want to get to. The thing is, in international legal parlance, when we speak of countries, when we say India is doing this or Pakistan is doing that, we don't really mean to say every Israeli and every Pakistani. We are talking about the state and state policy. Now, I have a huge problem if someone tells me that a particular country or a particular state or a particular government is beyond reproach. You cannot criticize them. It's off limits. Because of, some historical connotations that it might have. By that definition, the thing is कि पाकिस्तान के बारे में यूरोपियन पार्लियामेंट अगर कोई कुछ कहता है, या अगर कोई सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल रेजोल्यूशन कुछ कहती है, या if we are asked to take action against terrorists and, growing menace of terrorism, which I agree, on Pakistani soil, we've seen a lot of those groups. इसीलिए तो हम लोग वो बात करते हैं उर्दू से कालदम तंजीम, ठीक है, या prescribed organization, because terrorism is a problem.
But is that anti-Semitism?
अब हम लोग अगर ये कहना शुरू कर दें, पाकिस्तान says that, this is colonial undertones to it. This reminds us of those not so glorious colonial days when the Western world used to tell us and dictate us that, this is what we ought to be doing and our people are terrorists. The thing is that if there are terrorists on your land, you need to deal with it. Usi tarah se, if we come to is this anti-Semitism where we call out the Israeli government, and for nothing else, for clear and distinct violation of international humanitarian law, the 4 Geneva Conventions, we are talking about population transfer, demographic change, Article 49 of the Geneva Convention.
Yeah.
Who drafted these? Who framed these? So we are asking questions to the very same people who framed them in the first place. Now, asking these questions, does that become anti-Semitic? It does only if you point your fingers at one particular religious group. Then I have a problem
Or
with
if
it.
you're from CNN, I believe.
But
No, I think.
but our foreign minister did not do that.
Yeah,
He
she
did.
really
I
tried.
wrote
Yeah.
something on my social media accounts a few days ago. I said, you are my enemy if you are xenophobe, if you are an Islamophobe, if you are anti-Semitic. 2-3 days later, I said, criticizing Israeli government is not anti-Semitism, because if we start doing that, then tomorrow onwards, Saudi government is going to say that it is Muslim phobic if you try to accuse us of Jamal Khashoggi's murder. Then Russia is going to say to the UK that it is Russian phobic somehow, if you criticize Russia or if you accuse Russia of administering nerve agents to people or defectors.
But what will you say about Mehdi Hassan? I mean, he's an excellent gentleman that I usually follow on Twitter. Aaj usko kya ho gaya? He just said, "Ji, this is anti-Semitic."
Yeah. I wouldn't want to go. I'm seeing a lot of people going to conspiracy theories. Oh, yeah, big guy. He's been sold. No, that's not the thing. I think he really believes that it is anti-Semitic, but beliefs can also be wrong. And that is why I want to point out, I want to ask, we need to enter into discourse. Okay, fine.
Can you define for our members exactly what
is anti-Semitism?
Yeah.
In the simplest terms, because I remember I also had to come to grips with this whole notion of what anti-Semitism is. But it's about targeting a particular religious community and saying that, it's the problem is with them, or it's them who are the root cause of the problem. That is xenophobia, that is hate speech. That becomes problematic. Anti-Semitism is basically what Nazi era, what we saw Hitler doing. What Hitler had said at that time was, and I'm very glad actually something related to this I want to address. So in the Nazi era, Hitler's narrative was such that there is poverty in Germany, in our fatherland, in our Deutschland. People are unemployed. We've run out of jobs, and there's one community which is prospering, and that is the Jewish community. So he pointed all the fingers at Jewish people. He did not point his fingers at a government, at a state which would have been legitimate, only that the Jewish did not have a state of their own. He pointed his fingers at Jewish people. He said, these people own the world. They own the economic dynamics. They own the world economy. They are prospering. We are not. So the problem lies with them. He othered them. And he created this us versus them division. And that was anti-Semitism, because he then talked about final solution, which we saw what it was, the horrors of the Auschwitz camp, Birkenau camp. He put them to their death in gas chambers. Now, if my foreign minister had been saying that, I would have been leading protests. But my foreign minister did not say it. My foreign minister said what even Jewish people are saying, what even Holocaust survivors have been saying. And I accuse CNN of anti-Semitism, because how dare they equate those brave Holocaust survivors with Israeli state and the genocidal regime? How dare they? That does great disservice to the memory of Holocaust victims and those survivors.
Please also comment on the recent statement made by this member National Assembly, Kamal Shozab. I was hearing her speak in the National Assembly, and she said कि हिटलर ने कहा, and I quote her, हिटलर ने ये लोगों को इसलिए छोड़ा था ताकि दुनिया को पता लग जाए कि Jews कैसे लोग हैं. I think somebody who's a member National Assembly in Pakistan making such a statement and then seeing these 5 Maulvis thumping the desks, I think that's equally wrong. What do you say about that?
First of all, may I please thank you for asking me this question. It just makes this discussion very balanced and not just one-sided, as if, others are on a mission or on an agenda and they're conspiring against us and we are very good. No. Now, again, we've got people within our own political quarters, within our own, not just political quarters, but within our society, extremely anti-Semitic offensive language. And I'm sorry to say, but they don't represent me. So Kamal Shozab, what she said was she was endorsing Hitler's anti-Semitic rhetoric. That is anti-Semitic. The Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi saying that the Israeli government holds a lot of international clout is well-founded. Why? Because social media is censoring any criticism of the Israeli regime. The international media, it does not start asking questions about, would you condemn the deaths of 230 civilians, at least in Palestine? No, the first question is, would you condemn what Hamas is doing? Fine, we will condemn it. That also needs to be condemned if Israeli civilians are dying. But in the narrative, that comes somewhere later. What comes first is that people's houses are being demolished. What has led to this polarization? And within that equation, yes, any targeting of civilians is wrong. What happens with, this anti-Semitic rhetoric in our parliament, and not just parliament, by the way. So there's this Pakistani actor as well, Feroz Khan. He put up an Insta story, and again, he was trying to say that Hitler stands vindicated. He was quoting something along the lines of that Hitler had said that, he had kept some Jewish people alive so that they can tell the story of, what had been done to them.
This is absurd.
And an example was made out of them. And as if this is something to be glorified. It is not. It is horrific. Because the thing is, if you stand with Nazis, if you stand with Adolf Hitler, then you basically stand with the oppressors of those in Palestine and Gaza. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that when I read a father in Gaza saying that I've swapped my children, I've exchanged some of my children with my brother's children, that at least some of our, descendants will survive, some of our own children are going to survive, some of mine, some of yours. If these are the choices you're having to make, if a mother is telling us that I am sleeping with my children and my whole family in the same bed tonight so that if we die together, then you cannot say that to criticize a regime which is inflicting such suffering on these people is anti-Semitism. That is not anti-Semitic. I'm sorry to say, but we cannot create this culture of impunity, because if today they're coming for the Gazans, for the Palestinians, then tomorrow they're coming for us.
मुनीब, आप एक हमें और चीज भी quickly suggest करें कि what is the solution? Let's say as a Pakistani, and I'm sure Ramla has the same question, as a Pakistani, हम सड़कों पे जाने के अलावा, साइकिलों पे फिरने के अलावा और ये झंडे लहराने के अलावा, राइट टू प्रोटेस्ट बड़ा जरूरी है, आई एग्री विद दैट, लेकिन हम बेनिफिशियल क्या कर सकते हैं? एक सजेशन आई थी जियो टीवी पर कि हमारे जो लॉ मिनिस्टर साहब हैं, ही इज एन एक्सीलेंट इंटरनेशनल लॉयर, वो जाके कोई चीज इंटरनेशनल कोर्ट में लेके जाएं या कोई चीज फाइल करें. इज देयर एनीथिंग दैट वी कैन डू?
Treat your minorities well. Treat your religious minorities well. Your ethnic minorities well. Treat your women well. Every single person who is marginalized in our country, when they come up to us and they say that their rights have been violated, don't deny, lend a listening ear. Because if you are not empowering your own minorities, you are empowering those aggressors sitting there in Israel. Because why? You are setting that example of impunity. The message then you're sending out is, if we can silence dissent, if we can silence our already marginalized communities, then so can you. And it creates a lot of problems, for us, for our diplomats, for our foreign minister, when they go on to international fora and they try to raise voice for Kashmiri, for Rohingya, for the Palestinians, the world turns back and they ask, okay, but we've got such and such a report documented by Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International. They're saying this and that about your own minorities. And then saying, okay, oh no, this is all Western agenda, is not a satisfactory answer enough. So we need to have a good story to tell to the world about our own human rights record and lead by example. Because if we empower our minorities, we are empowering those suffering day in and day out in Palestine.
But can we go to court, ICC or ICJ against...
Now the international legal dimension, because this was the moral dimension, which is extremely important. Because then that is exactly what is going to raise our clout when we go to International Criminal Court or ICJ or, Human Rights Council. Now, just this week, Shah Mahmood Qureshi Saab has addressed, General Assembly, and he's said that the Security Council needs to take up this matter. Now, the problem with Security Council is that the good thing is Security Council has enforcement powers. Its resolutions are binding, unlike the General Assembly and unlike the Human Rights Council. But you've got the USA sitting there to veto it. So when on CNN you question US and Israeli policies, you cannot shut that down by labeling it as anti-Semitism. Okay, fine.
So
the doors are shut.
Proceedings start. Is there any other way that proceedings?
The doors are shut at Security Council. What are the avenues? Now, a welcome development has been the fact that the International Criminal Court has announced that they have jurisdiction over the alleged, as they call it, war crimes committed by the Israeli regime in Gaza, specifically in 2014. Fatou Bensouda, who is the prosecutor of the ICC, she's just announced it. So that is very good. And the fact that the ICC has accorded the status of a state to Palestine is very good.
Countries like Germany, they submitted that.
A majority of the international community does not recognize them as such. The nearest Palestine has been able to come to it is that the PLO has been given an observer entity, not even a state status within the UN. But this is a good development. My question is, when will the ICC now exercise this jurisdiction, especially when, situation is getting worse by the day, even though it has been announced?
Can it exercise this jurisdiction suo moto?
The ICC gains jurisdiction when anything happens, when a war crime or a crime against humanity or an act of aggression or genocide or torture take place. When any of this takes place on the territory of a state party, even if those committing these acts of aggression or crimes against humanity are not state parties to the ICC. So, Palestine is a state party. That gives the ICC jurisdiction over these so-called alleged war crimes. So that's very good. They have all the resources to investigate this further.
So
I'm just saying
good
speed
thing.
up the process.
Yeah,
Speed up the process, because otherwise international law and these mechanisms become illusory. We need to bring these into force. We need to bring international law into action. The law is there. The procedures are there. Human Rights Council, interestingly, the majority of Human Rights Council's resolutions are against Israel, something, for which America has criticized the HRC a lot. But there is a realization even in the international sphere that what Israel is doing is not right. And so then it is not becoming of the international community to sit back and tell and dictate and lecture our foreign minister that next time, please, refrain from employing such anti-Semitic rhetoric, because then, the thing is that your Geneva Conventions, your international humanitarian law, what had been said in the Nuremberg trials, what had been said by the international, forums on ICTY, International Criminal Tribunals on Yugoslavia and Rwanda, everything is then anti-Semitism.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
इसी नोट पे हमारा सेकंड सेगमेंट खत्म होता है. Let's move on to the third segment. Stay tuned.